All right. Well, thanks for having me on the call today. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited about this platform here. So many things, as you guys know, have happened in our industry over the last 6 to 12 months. Some good, some bad, some ugly. Definitely more complex. And what we decided to do was really make a tool available to our life insurance advisor community, something very similar to what I've been using for the last, almost 7 years now. The idea of trying to explain how an IUL works to your client can be a little bit challenging sometimes, even before AG 49A, in the sense that if you look at a carrier illustration, obviously the carrier illustration shows a static positive return every year, usually somewhere between 5 to 6%. And you're at the same time as you're showing a client a static fixed return every year in the carrier illustration, you've got to explain to them that that is not how this product actually works. In reality, it's S&P correlated. There's a floor and a cap. And as soon as all these multipliers came along, you've got yet another variable to explain to your client. And all of that, as if that wasn't confusing enough, AG 49A made it even more confusing because they put some major constrictions on what the carrier illustration can actually show. Now, obviously, you have a fixed annual return, but if you're going to use a participating loan to draw incomes out in the future, that participating loan rate can only be 50 basis points less than what the carrier illustration is showing. And in most cases, the spread between the index credit and the participating loan rate is much greater than 50 basis points. So it really hamstrings you in terms of what you can show. On top of that, these products that have multipliers, in the carrier illustration, if you're going to illustrate it with the multiplier feature on, they deduct the multiplier charge from the cash value of the product, but they do not give you any sort of multiplier benefit illustrated in the carrier illustration. So very, very confusing. So what this tool that we built seeks to do is to be able to educate your client as to what is actually going on in terms of the inner workings of the product. We'll talk on this call today a little bit about compliance as well. We want to be really, really black and white in terms of what we can and cannot do and can and cannot say from a compliance standpoint. And at the very end, we will wrap it up with a Q&A session. I'm happy to extremely bluntly and transparently answer any questions you guys have. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to start off, we're going to take a look at the sample illustration here, male age 50. This is a National Life Group Peak Life IUL. And we're going to take a look at the carrier illustration first and kind of step through it, and then we'll get into what this Breadbox report actually is and what it does. So if we look at the standard carrier illustration here, we've got $100,000 in annual premium going into this policy on a 10-pay. Again, very vanilla. And when we start to draw income down, it shows an income drawdown of $100,368 per year, starting in policy year 15, and that continues all the way through. Now, this particular illustration here is run using their just vanilla enhancer option. What that means is there is no multiplier charge on there whatsoever. There is a 15 basis point free multiplier you get that's kind of built into the product, but this is not what you would call a standard multiplier IUL. Again, this is run with a static index credit, max AG 49A at 5.73%. In the carrier illustration, it is showing a participating loan rate of just 50 basis points less than that, despite the fact that the actual participating loan rate is only 5%. And on top of that, we already talked about that, right? It has the quote unquote free multiplier that gives you a 15 basis point bump on the index credit. Now, the problem with what we're looking at here is, let's say you have a client that actually wants to kind of go for it, and they want to buy the product with the enhancer max multiplier option. That is the more aggressive multiplier option that this product has. Well, if you run the exact same illustration using the enhancer max multiplier, which we did, and you look at the income drawdown there on the left-hand side, the income reduces from 100,000 down to, oh, that's a typo there, 98,000. So a little bit less, and that's kind of weird, right? Why would the income be less with the more aggressive multiplier feature on? Well, the reason is because they are dinging you with the multiplier charge, but giving you no benefit whatsoever. And that is based on the current AG 49A guidelines. I often say that AG 49A is kind of like if you were selling a $500,000 Lamborghini Aventador that did 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, that had 690 horsepower. But if the product brochure, which is kind of like the carrier illustration, right, analogous to the carrier illustration, if the product brochure said it only had 490 horsepower and did 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds as opposed to 2.5 seconds, well, that would be a very difficult sell, right? You're trying to sell someone a $500,000 car, and the brochure says it does a kind of a smidgen of what it actually does in reality. How do you convince your client that it actually does have 690 horsepower when the brochure says it only has 490 horsepower? That is kind of what AG 49A has done to folks that are selling IULs, especially if you are an advisor selling an IUL for accumulation and income purposes. It just is a far cry of what that product is really designed to do. So what we're going to get into is, I call this the illusion of the carrier illustrations as they sit today, right? So if we look at these two coffee tables here, would you agree that the coffee table on the left-hand side, let's say the long edge was 4 feet long, would you say that the square coffee table, that the edge or the edges of the square coffee table are shorter than 4 feet? It looks pretty obvious, but if we do this little deal here and rotate the 4-foot measuring stick on its side, we see that the square coffee table edge is actually the same exact length as the coffee table that looks to be long and skinny. Now, how could that possibly be? It's an optical illusion. And that is kind of how I look at the current carrier illustrations, that they're kind of an optical illusion, meaning that the optics of what that carrier illustration shows, there are so many, historically speaking, by the way, if you look at historical S&P returns, the carrier illustration is, I'm going to be nice and polite here, I'm going to say it is extremely conservative. So what the Breadbox report essentially does is, and let me be very clear from a compliance standpoint here, it's a report that creates a proxy for an IUL. Okay, so this is not an IUL. This is not a carrier illustration. This is not a supplemental life insurance illustration. This is what we call a hypothetical synthetic asset. This is a make-believe, made-up, fictitious investment account that just so happens to behave somewhat similar to an IUL. And what do I mean by that? What does that mean, behave similar to an IUL? Well, let me just explain how this works. It is S&P 500 correlated. It has a floor and a cap. There are certain charges and fees that get deducted from this fictitious investment account before the asset credits. And those charges and fees just so happen to be very similar to that of an IUL. So again, this is not an IUL, it's a proxy for an IUL. So this is how this is built essentially. If you look at this page here, this is our Excel input tab. When you request a report, come up here to the left-hand side, you're going to put in there the client name, age, your agency, and your email address. And then here, we're going to have you put in the year that you want the income drawdowns to start and the year you want the income drawdowns to end. We also have this cool library of a handful of real-world products from different carriers. And you can select the carrier, the product, the multiplier design, and the cap type, because some of these products have a high cap option or a standard cap option. And you can select these from all these cells here have drawdown menus. drop-down menus, and you can put it in there. And what we'll do is it will import in what we see here in the gray area here. It will import in the multiplier asset-based charge. If there is one, it will import in the multiplier factor, and it will also import in any persistency bonus if that particular product has a persistency bonus. So it will import that in there. If you want to model a crediting method that is similar to a real-world IUL product that we do not have in the library, that's okay. You can click in where it says carry. You're going to click there. Oops. And you click there. It will drop down, and you can select custom, and you can essentially import or type in the multiplier charges and benefit schedule based on that product that you are wanting to compare it to. Then what we'll do on the right-hand side, you'll input here the client contributions, which would be the equivalent of the policy premiums. You can input the premium load charges, the total policy charges, as well as the surrender charges. And what's going to happen here is that our system is now going to run that data through literally 121 different 40-year periods that actually existed, starting on January 1st, 1970. It rolls forward 40 years. And then we go to February 1st, 1970, roll forward 40 years. Then March 1st, 1970, April 1st, et cetera, totaling 121 different 40-year scenarios. Our data then goes through those different scenarios and then dynamically calculates the internal rate of return based off of the client contributions and the charges and the crediting and all those back-tested S&P returns, dynamically calculates the IRR in each one of those actual 40-year periods. And then it ranks them best, median, worst, and most recent. What we're going to start off looking at is the most recent 40-year period. Okay, so this is the latest 40-year period. It consolidates everything into a nice, easy to follow sheet here, and then we'll dig into the details in just a second. So the simple version here, again, starts off on January 1st, 1980. We show the client contribution at 100,000 a year, and based on this particular back-tested 40-year period, the client could draw down just over $130,000 per year. And that box is a little off there, but $130,000 per year, which would be a total of $3.3 million in total income drawn down. At the end of 40 years, you would still have just over $1 million in account value. And so if we looked up there in the left-hand corner, we got $1 million going in. Again, that's $100,000 per year for 10 years. You have a total, what we call a total return of $4.3 million. That is the total income drawn down plus the year 40 account balance. And that would have calculated a 6.67% net internal rate of return. Here's the same thing we're looking at here, just in a different depiction here. Cool little graphs. We got the income drawdowns. We got the account value is in the dark blue section there. And then the light blue crest as we go up the ladder there. That is the total income, the cumulative income drawn down on top of the account value in each one of those years. So real basic. If the client wants to dig a little deeper, we actually have a ledger here. Again, this is the most recent 40-year look-back period. Again, we have $100,000 in contribution going in. And in each year, they're based on the account value, based on the index credit with the floor and the cap. We are showing the actual dollar credits that would credit towards the cash value in each one of those years. As we see, some of those years are zero because the S&P 500 in those years was negative, hence the 0% floor kicked in. And then in the red column there, we actually have the annual charges as well. And that includes the multiplier charges. We want to dig a little bit deeper. This thing's really cool here, I think. This is the charges and credits page. And we do this for the most recent 40-year period, the best 40-year period, the median 40-year period, and the worst 40-year period. We have all this data to back up all the numbers. This is the most recent 40-year period. And if you look at the total charges and compare them to the multiplier charges, as the years go by towards the end, you say, geez, those multiplier charges are expensive compared to the standard charges, right? Well, the question becomes, is it worth it? And that is what the big debate has been with these multiplier IULs. Is it worth it? The problem is no one's got the ability to mathematically prove that it is worth it or that it is not worth it until we came along with this tool. So we're going to take a look at what all this means. In that blue column there, those would be the credits in each of those years, just based on the floor and the cap. And then separate from that, we have isolated the multiplier credits. In other words, the cash value credits that are associated with getting that extra bump from that multiplier feature, which I think is really cool. So I'm going to stop right here for just a second. And I think it's something really important to emphasize. The spirit of this tool is not just so we can show something that it looks better than the carrier illustration, so we can go out there and sell a ton of IULs. Okay? That is not the spirit of this. The spirit of this tool is rooted in education. How do you teach a client how floors and caps and multipliers work? In fact, if you have not read this already, I would highly encourage you to Google class action lawsuit Pacific Life. And you can read the actual lawsuit that was filed against Pacific Life and the agent associated with that lawsuit. And you can read all the complaints in this formal lawsuit that the client filed against the agent and the carrier. I read through this entire lawsuit, page by page, line by line, word by word with all of my partners. And the common theme that went through that whole lawsuit was the client accused the carrier and the agent for not explaining how the charges work. Now, this is a major problem in our industry because most folks never talk about the charges. Well, as we get into a more and more litigious society, and as these products become more and more complex, and some of them are complex, but very, very well constructed, which we'll get into. The fact that folks are getting litigious and these products will become more complex, and we have this AG 49A thing that is just really crushing the outcomes that we're able to show a client. I believe we've got to really do a good job of educating your client and explaining how this stuff works. So on this next page here, let me look at this real quick here. The multiplier charges in this 40-year period, just the multiplier charges, not all the other charges, total over $1.7 million. That's a lot of additional charges. But if we look at the multiplier benefit, the multiplier bonuses, just the multiplier bonuses, not the total index credit, just the multiplier bonuses alone in this 40-year look back here, we're over 3.5 million. So the total net gain between the multiplier charges and the multiplier bonuses was actually almost $1.8 million. That is greater than double the return on investment if we look at the multiplier charges compared to the multiplier bonuses. I think that tells a pretty compelling story there regarding multipliers. Then again, this is just one of several products of several carriers that have multiplier options built into their products. Again, this is National Life Group we're looking at here. Okay. All right, next page here. I know it's a ton of numbers. Again, don't be overly intimidated by just the massive sea of numbers here. If you really, and we'll teach you how to use this with your clients, if you really use this with your client effectively, you're really looking at two lines here in this total sheet here. We're looking at one example of a positive S&P return, and this year it was a little over 19%. We'd apply the floor and then multiply that by the multiplier, and the after multiplier index credit here would be 16%. Okay, you would multiply 16% times the asset value, and in that given year, the client would have gotten credited just over $378,000. In an S&P year that was negative, you would apply the floor and the cap, in this case, the floor of 0. The problem is that 0 times the multiplier is still 0. And so you have 0 index credit in that year after you got hit with all those multiplier charges. Again, the question is it actually worth it? Well, in this particular 40-year look back, we found that mathematically speaking, it was, because the multiplier bonuses were double what the multiplier charges were. Okay, this next page here, I think this is really cool too. If you look at we call them fixed charges. This is the equivalent of the standard policy charges. In our Breadbox report, we actually round up the actual policy charges to the nearest $100, just to be more conservative. We call them fixed charges. In a real world IUL, those charges are not fixed. You have the cost of insurance is a factor of the net amount at risk, and there's a big formula that goes into it. But for the sake of the Breadbox report, again, we're just rounding those charges up to the nearest $100. And if you compare that to the asset value as a percentage of asset value, if you look down where that big red arrow is at the bottom, by the time you hit year 31, the charges are 14 basis points of the total value. That's less than a Vanguard ETF spider account. I mean, you're talking about such a low overall cost as a percentage of the asset. For all these folks out there, it's the Susie Ormans, the Dave Ramseys of the world that say, oh, permanent life insurance, the cost of insurance is too high. It drags down the return. Really? We're talking 14 bips by the time you get year 31 in this example. So I think this can be a really valuable page, a really valuable tool to use with your client if they start saying, oh, well, I heard life insurance is not a good investment because the cost of insurance is too much. Well, mathematically speaking, after you get outside that first 10-year window, that is just definitely not true. Okay. The other cool thing about the Breadbox report is it shows a range of outcomes. Again, we run this through 121 different 40-year periods. We look at we just looked at the most recent one. And then what we're going to look at next here is the best 40-year period, the worst 40-year period, and the median 40-year period. The median 40-year period, what that means is that is the 61st best 40-year period out of the 121 different 40-year periods. And what's cool about this graph here, again, we look at that is the account value of the best 40 years, the median 40 years, the most recent 40 years that we just looked at, and the worst 40 years. And so it shows you a range of outcomes. Again, from a kind of cover your butt kind of standpoint as an advisor with a litigious client in the future, if you have this in your client file and you say, hey, look, we showed them a range of outcomes. We didn't just show them, in this case, a static 5.73% return every year. We showed them historical returns in this hypothetical synthetic asset that has the same floor and cap and multiplier features as the actual product they bought. And we're showing them, again, a range of outcomes. Again, this is so important. Well, let's go back to this multiplier issue. The big beef that the anti-multiplier people have out there is they will say things like, well, if you get too many zeros in a row and you have too much volatility, you're going to have all those multiplier charges and no multiplier benefit in a year where the index credit's 0. Philosophically, I would agree. But the question is, mathematically speaking, I keep going back to the math, right? Mathematically speaking, is that true or is that not true? That's all I care about is the math, right? No one cares about Darren's feelings. No one cares about how Darren feels about the math or what my opinion is about the IUL products. Math is either correct or it's incorrect. And that's what this Breadbox report does. So if we look at the multiplier charges during the worst 40-year period, okay, this is the worst 40-year period. In other words, the 40-year period that produced the worst internal rate of return out of 121 different periods we analyzed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros in the first 10 years of this sequence, and then a bunch of more zeros, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 zeros in that 40-year period. And in the first 10 years, half of those years in the first 10 years were negative S&P returns. So you got 5 zeros in the first 10 years. That's pretty adverse, I think. Total multiplier charges, 1.4 million. Total multiplier bonuses, 2.8 million. Again, that is, you're getting a 2-to-1 deal, 2x, right? Double the return on your investment. I think that is incredibly compelling, given the fact that this was the worst 40-year period out of 121 periods analyzed. Huge, huge difference. Okay, so maybe you're asking, okay, well, what does this all mean, Darren? How do we use this in a real-world situation? How do we present this to a client? Well, let's take a look at the actual policy illustration compared to the Breadbox report. Again, this one was run with the enhancer max. If you look at the top left-hand corner there, this is the actual maximum multiplier option that the client can choose. So let's say that's what the client wanted to buy. All right, we go to the worst. I'm going to compare the worst 40-year period using the enhancer max multiplier design. We got 98,000 coming out in the carrier illustration. We have an average income of 105,000 coming out of the worst 40-year period. And that little asterisk there, the reason it's the average income is if you look at the green box of the actual incomes coming out, the way that our Breadbox report engine is set up is it will never pull greater than 20% of the account value in any given year. So we calculate the maximum we can pull out in the most recent 40-year period, in this case, 130,000. And then we pull that same 130,000 out of the best 40-year period, the median 40-year period, the worst 40-year period. Obviously, this is the worst 40-year period. And so when we start to draw down 130,000, by the time we hit year 33 here, we're running kind of thin in account value. And so it will automatically reduce the drawdown amounts to never be greater than 20% of the account value in any given year. So as you see here, it starts to reduce, then it comes back up, and then it draws down to 0 here. Now, in a real world scenario, depending on the product you're using, some of these products, maybe you're using a no lapse guarantee rider on these products. If you're going to draw income down, that would be one way to make sure that in a real world situation that you would not draw that account value down to 0. You just get really close, and then it would be just enough to keep that policy in force so that the client doesn't experience any phantom income tax or anything like that from the drawdowns. But I thought this was really compelling here because, again, the worst 40-year period, you're still able to draw down considerably more total income than you are in the carrier illustration. How much more? About 200 grand more. Quite a bit of difference. Now, and again, this is the worst 40-year period, right? So if we look at kind of a summary grid here, this is the carrier illustration income drawdown. Again, this was assuming they, not assuming they, this was when we actually ran the carrier illustration using the enhancer max multiplier. If we look at the worst, median, and best 40-year periods in the Breadbox report, very, very different outcome. And check out the total income drawdown difference between the carrier illustration and the worst 40-year Breadbox report. But then let's look at the median and best case versions. And then let's look at the 40-year account balance. Look at the median 40 right here. We have drawn down 3.3 million in income versus 2.5 and have over $2 million in account value after 40 years versus 400 grand in the carrier illustration. Pretty compelling. And if we look at the IRRs, It's not even close. So we ran the carrier illustration at 5.73%, but as we know, that's the gross index return, right? That's not the IRR. That's the gross index return versus in the Breadbox, we have all that volatility, right? And we're crediting based off of the actual floor and cap in each one of those years. And when we look at the net internal rate of return after the charges, after everything, the net IRR with the dollars in and dollars coming out in the form of income drawdowns, plus the 40-year account balance, 5% in the carrier illustration versus 5.44 in the worst 40, 7.17 in the median 40, and 8.18 in the best 40. Huge difference. So we say, I don't often give multiplier advice, but when I do, it's using Breadbox, and Breadbox, baby. We are now 38 minutes in. Shawn, I can do one of two things. I have about 13 minutes of explaining how an advisor requests a Breadbox report. I can do now and then take Q&A after, or I can jump. Excuse me. Maybe should we just jump to Q&A right now? What do you think, Shawn?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Why don't you at least tell them how they can access this platform?
Absolutely. If you go to breadboxsolutions.com, this is our website here. If you scroll down to the bottom of this homepage, we have three. Oh, actually, let me pull this up, the actual website up. We have three different options that the client can choose from, and it's all based on. Actually, let me exit this here. It's all based on number of reports that an advisor wants per month. So if we go again, breadboxsolutions.com. Bad connection. Here we go. Okay, and page down the bottom here, we have three different monthly subscription options. $2.99 a month gets you 5 reports per month. $5.49 per month gets you 10 reports, and then $1,000 gets you 20 reports per month. There is a one-time sign-up fee of $1,500, and that includes extensive training that we go through with the advisors to make sure that they know how to run the reports, run the carrier illustration, fill out the input sheet, and then upload it to us. And then if you click on products here, actually click on FAQs, that's even better. If you click on FAQs, it'll jump you to a page. There is a video of me going through an actual, like a mock client meeting here, showing you exactly how to use it. And there are a ton of FAQ video clips here that address the most frequently asked questions. And then if you scroll to the very bottom here, pretty much any question that anyone would have is going to be in this FAQ section here.
Darren, a couple of questions did pop up while you were speaking. One was, does this software calculate death benefit or just cash value?
That's a great question. So it does not calculate death benefit. If it did that, that would be a life insurance illustration. And again, we're very, very clear, this is not a life insurance illustration. I took this to all of the advanced planning attorneys and compliance departments with all of the major IUL carriers that we work with. They all know exactly what we're doing. They all know exactly how we're positioning this. The key is to use this. Think of it like this. It's like, I'll give you two analogies, not exact analogies, but pretty close, right? Let's say if you were selling Corvettes and you worked at a Chevy dealership and you could not take the client for a test drive, right? Because that's essentially the business we're in. We cannot take clients for test drives. We've got the Corvette brochure, very similar to like the carrier illustration. If you had a third-party document that showed like testing that was done through a third party, like a car and driver magazine or a consumer reports report or something like that. That's kind of in the spirit of what the Breadbox report is, right? It's saying, look, we're showing you the carrier illustration. This is assuming the index does, again, with this product, 5.73% every year. It has all these assumptions. This report over here is a hypothetical report that shows you how floors and caps work and how charges work. And if I was the client, I would want to look at both. Looking at only one versus the other, in my opinion, gives the client a very limited scope as to what they're actually buying. So what you could do in terms of the death benefit side is you could look at the ledger of the account values in the Breadbox report and year to year to year and match those up with the cash surrender value amounts in the carrier illustration. And if the account values in the Breadbox report are the same or greater than the carrier illustration, then it would stand to be logical to assume that if the actual cash value in a real world IUL was what it was showing in the Breadbox report, then the death benefit would have to be at least as much as what the carrier illustration shows. All right. If it's less, hey, then you should probably worry a little bit about the product construction of how that product is designed. Obviously, if the account value in the Breadbox report is greater than the death benefit as illustrated, well, in a real world IUL, if the cash value was greater, then that would actually have to naturally push up the death benefit of a real world IUL product. So the death benefit would have to be greater than the account value as shown, assuming that account value was what the cash surrender value was in a real policy.
So Darren, you've clearly run a lot of these proposals with a lot of different carrier products. In general, is the static carrier illustration, is that typically illustrating, less cash value than the 40-year worst case scenario? Would that be a fair statement?
That's a great question. It will depend on several things, right? If you run an illustration on a 70-year-old, table F, then things are going to look uglier. If they're younger and healthy, things will look a little bit better. If the carrier illustration was run, and by the way, let me preface what I'm going to say by saying I pass no judgment on anybody, right? I'm not judging any agents out there, but I have seen carrier illustrations that work in the illustration but do not work in the Breadbox report. And so anybody can play little tricks in the carrier illustration by making things look better than what would logically happen in reality, right? They could, like I've seen some illustrations where the funding period is very short, maybe like a 3-pay or something, and all of a sudden they're pulling income out like super early, like earlier than 10 years into it. And in a real world IUL, the chances of that working are very, very slim because of the policy charges and because of all of the different things that go into it. And so when you take data and put it into the Breadbox report based on real charges, based on real asset-based charges, it's going to give you a more accurate depiction. So that's a long answer to Shawn. Usually it's better in the Breadbox report than the carrier illustration, but sometimes it's not. And that's not a bummer. If anything, that's a safeguard, right? That's just protected the agent from selling the client something that works in a carrier illustration software that could very well likely not work in reality. I see one of my business partners just joined here, Simo Campari. He is on the line with us too. Simo is really the principal math brain behind building the infrastructure for this report. Simo, did you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I'm just listening along, but everything you said is 100% correct. While it's usually true, not always, but for a reason.
Yeah.
I got another question that popped up, Darren. Is this Breadbox software available for an agency with multiple users? for like a discounted or agency enterprise price?
We do have special enterprise pricing, and you can contact us. If you go to our website and click contact us and inquire about that, we can price that out. The benefit to having enterprise pricing is this is on an individual basis is set up for a certain number of reports per month per user. So if you had, say, an agency of 10 agents or 20 agents, as you guys know, it's the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of your agents are going to not only produce 80% of the volume, but they're going to quote 80% of the illustrations as well. And so when you have an enterprise setup, it's one user account, and all of those reports would go into that one user account. Any other color you want to add to that, Simo?
Nope, that's right.
Okay. Simo's a man of few words today. Either that or I'm doing a good job answering the questions. Okay.
It's the latter.
Okay. What do we got next here, Shawn?
I guess just maybe to reiterate that, as far as I know, there is nothing in the industry that does what this software does. I mean, because you are actually taking the fees, loads, charges, mortality costs, even tweaking those on a conservative basis, including that in the report, as well as, you know, the actual caps and participation rates of the products, and this back testing it 121 times. So it's a pretty accurate representation of how these things, I think, could work. And it's been my thought all along that if you're, you know, using a quality product, you're illustrating it correctly, you're typically going to underpromise and overdeliver for your client. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, again, I mean, not that this can't work with non-multiplier products. It actually does. Absolutely. Right. You're applying the floor and the cap, and you're really seeing how volatility is an IUL's friend. Right. In a non-insurance based investment account, volatility is your enemy. But in this product, volatility can certainly be your friend. In this particular case we just ran here on the 50-year-old, in the worst case scenario, again, having the multiplier bonuses be double the multiplier charges, I think, again, that's a great way to explain this to your client. Now, sometimes that's not the case. In some products, that's the multiplier charge versus the multiplier benefit is, in fact, I looked at one this morning, I think it was 23% delta between the charges and the multiplier credits, which is still great, right? But this particular one at 2x, I thought was pretty darn compelling.
I've got another question here. How many carriers do you have loaded in your database?
We currently have, let's see here, Allianz, Hancock, National Life Group, Pac Life, Simo, who else do we have here? I can pull this up.
While you're looking that up, I think the important point here to realize is that while we pre-store a number of these snapshots of these products from various carriers that were captured at different points in time, the solution we have can accommodate any carrier's products with any set of inputs. We allow a user to custom enter basically any specific charges, multipliers, et cetera, for any product. And I think that in many ways, sort of the library we have, it's not there to be the Bible in terms of officially declaring what the carrier solution is. It is intended to be a starting point for thinking about products. The carrier ultimately always has the final word on what the things are. Particularly, they may change a particular product characteristic, and we may not find out about it until, you know, a week or two later. So there may be a point in time where we have the old version there. So I always encourage everybody to sort of, as part of the submission, just check that the numbers that are going into the inputs do in fact reflect the current product that you wish to model.
Yeah. Okay. So we got Allianz, Lincoln, National Life Group, Nationwide, PAC, and Penn. Those are the ones we have loaded in there currently.
And to add a new carrier, I mean, pretty much all you need is an illustration and the report page that shows the fees, loads, and charges in the illustration. Is that more or less what you're working off of?
Yes, in fact, I'll show you in real time here. Let me blow this up so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Okay, so in the drop down here, you would select the carrier, the ones that we have loaded in here. If you want to use a carrier that's not in here, Transamerican as an example, or Global Atlantic or something like that, you click on custom and would zero these out. And when you go to this design schedule library here, this is where all the preloaded designs are. You could go here.
I don't think you're sharing your screen right now if you're intending, Darren.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Geez. Give me 1 second. Everyone's probably thinking, what in the hell is this guy doing? All right, here we go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we go back here. This is the drop-down menu where you select the carrier. If the carrier is not in here or the product is not in here, from the carrier, you would click custom, and then you go to design schedule library down here at the bottom. And then these areas here, you could put in whatever you want. So, 0% floor, whatever, 10% cap, participating loan rate, 6, whatever it was. And then you would put in there, if they have a high cap charge in the form of an asset-based charge, you put that in there. The multiplier asset-based charge, the multiplier factor. And then if they have any persistency bonus, you would put that in there too. And then when you do that, that would automatically pull in everything from the design schedule library.
Here's a good question. Does the Breadbox calculate a participating loan in these reports?
It does. Yep. And you can either use the actual real world products participating loan rate, or you can manually change it if you wanted to.
And so the Breadbox, if let's say the participating loan charge is 5%, and the return that year was 10, the Breadbox report is going to show an arbitrage of 5% in that year.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so important. I mean, that's the way it would actually work. That's the way the product works. And that's such, and again, the spirit is not to say, oh, look at the Breadbox report. It's so much better than the carry illustration. Oh, great. We got something better to go sell more IULs because it looks better. Right? That's not the spirit. The spirit is rooted in education. But part of the education, it works both ways, right? Yeah, if you get a 10% index credit and the par loan rate's 5, you're making a spread of 5. But if the S&P is negative 30% and you get a 0, and the par rate is 5, right? You're getting charged 5%. So it's working to your detriment if you hit a 0. It's working to your benefit if the index credit is above the actual participating loan rate. And I think that's a really valuable discussion to have with your client.
Well, I think that's all the questions I see, Darren. Want to thank you again for doing this presentation.
I saw one more question there that I don't know if we got from Bob Walker there about the cumulative balances over the 40-year period. Do we want to cover that as well? I think page 7 of the Breadbox report, Darren, illustrates it quite well.
Okay, yeah, you want to handle that?
If I understand correctly, that are showing the account balance cumulatively over time, and particularly those years where we get a 0 or no credits, how we might see the actual balances go down instead of up.
Yeah, I guess the question is asking if you're showing the account balances year by year, the pluses and minuses, and I believe that's yes, you do. It's on one of those pages.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So if we look at account balance here,
you're not sharing your screen again if you want to.
Oh, geez, sorry. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so we see here if account balance, well, let's go to the beginning here. Account balance was 1.6 million. You got 0 credit. You got a $59,000 charge. And so now we see that account balance go from 1.6 million down to 1.5 million, or 1.61 million down to 1.55 million here.
Let's see. I think that covers all the questions that I see out there. Again, thanks for your time, Darren, and thank to everyone for attending. I believe we will have this webinar recorded for future use, or if you want to take a look at it, and check out Darren's website at breadboxsolutions.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to give BGA Insurance a call, and we're hoping to help you out on your next life insurance case.
Thanks a lot, Shawn. Appreciate the support.
Thank you.
All right, guys.